Okay guys, welcome to Module 8. Wow, we're already on Module 8. Yikes, if you've gotten this far, you're doing pretty good. Alright, anyhow, this is Lesson 15, Teaching Basic Reading. Now, right now you might be thinking like, oh, what's going on? We already looked at reading activities. Well, you're right, we already have looked at reading activities. However, this is about teaching basic reading for beginners, right? And teaching basic reading to beginners can be quite tough, and that's what we're going to talk about in today's lesson. So guys, our first activity of today's lesson is that we're going to learn a different way to teach basic reading. So get ready for a new method. In activity 2, we're going to be doing two different things actually. We're going to briefly look at using flashcards. And you might think, oh, we already talked about that. And we have, but we're going to look at a different kind of flashcard activity. And we're also going to be discussing simple reading tasks. After that, guys, in our last activity today, we're going to talk about the relationship between sound and spelling in English. All right, guys, so get ready. We're going to jump into our first activity in a few seconds. Okay guys, so like I said, we're going to dive into activity 1, but before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit about teaching reading, basic reading. So when you're teaching lower level classes, you'll notice that teaching reading can be quite stressful. So what a lot of teachers generally tend to do is to rely on repetition and repeating and just reading something in class again and again and again. But this is not the best way to do it. There is another way, right, which we're going to look at in a second. However, can you guys remember what it was like to read in your own native language? So whether you're Korean, Japanese, Vietnamese, etc., can you remember that experience? What was it like when you were first beginning to learn how to read? Can you remember it? Probably not. If you can, wow, you're some kind of genius, because I certainly can't remember what it was like to learn how to read in English, right? It happened such a long time ago, right? Maybe you might even have a hard time remembering what it was like to learn how to read in English, right? It probably also happened a fairly long time ago. And that's one of the problems why it's hard for us to teach basic reading, is because we can't really truly understand what our students are going through, right? Because we can't remember what that experience was like for us. So with using this method here, we're going to put ourselves into the shoes of somebody who's just beginning to learn how to read in a different language. That's why that first activity might look so strange to you guys, right? Now, this is a 4-step process, and we're going to take a look at the first 2 steps here first. Then we're going to take a look at the 2 other steps afterwards. So the first 2 steps though, guys, are pretty basic. So you should follow this, or follow me and see how it goes. So number 1, you've got, here are some words written in NewScript. Now unfortunately NewScript is kind of a useless language, but anyhow, right? So here are some words written in NewScript. You got school, class, student, and teacher, right? And then it says, here are the words in a different order. Can you recognize them, right? So following this process, you have to give your students some time to actually look at these words, just a few minutes, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and try to memorize them. School, class, student, teacher. All right, try to memorize them. And then after you give them some time to try to memorize it, move on to the second part of number 1. Here are the words in a different order. Can you recognize them, right? So you guys should try this, right? Can you recognize these words? Now, of course, I can see them from up here. Obviously, this is not very hard for me, but of course, you've got student, and then you've got this word that kind of looks like Korean, but it's not Korean. You've got school, and then after that, what do you have? You've got teacher, and lastly, you've got class. Okay, all right. Okay, now after they've done that, they got to move on to the second part. And it says in your activity 1, it says, you should fold the paper in half so that you can't see this part here, right? And moving on to the next part. You've got match the NewScript with the English word. All right, so you've got boom, 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 boom. Can you remember which word means what? I'm pretty sure it was like this. And that one. Now I hope that's right. I could be wrong. I didn't spend too much time trying to memorize it, to be honest. All right. Anyhow, so that's the 2-step process, but remember, this is 4-step. We only finished 2, so we got 2 more to do. So give me some time, give me a short break. I'm going to come back with step 3 and step 4. Okay guys, so let's continue that process. We've got the next 2 steps on the board here. So the 3rd step, guys, says read this text. Now, so students will read this text, but they'll notice that there's new script in the text, right? So it says, in our town, there are only 2. This is not enough for so many people. So they are very crowded. In my there are 1,000 and only 25 There are 50 in my instead of there are even more. What does that mean, right? Now, the students have already followed step 1 and step 2. Plus, they should be able to guess the word from context here, right? So what you're going to have your students do is write what they think the meaning of this word is here in English above it. So let's take a look together. Now you guys should be able to do this yourselves. Don't cheat. Don't go back to the step 1 and cheat. Try to do it. Just make a guess. So you got, in our town, there are only 2... What could this be? Come on, it's schools, right? There are only 2 schools. This is not enough for so many people, so they're very crowded. In my school, so you'll notice there's no 2 here. In my school, there are 1,000, what was that one? Students, right? There are 1,000 students. And only 25 teachers. There are 50, what is that? Students. In my, you should be able to guess, right? In my class. In some, now this is a little bit different from the previous one because it's class, but you've got this extra little 2 likes thing here. So it's probably classes. So in some classes, there are even more, right? So even if you couldn't really remember what those words meant, you should be able to make a good guess based upon the context, right? So I hope you guys were able to do that by yourselves without me helping, but let's move on to our 4th step. Now our 4th step here actually includes 2 different things that we got to do. Now, I've written this down here on the board. You guys have that in your book. And this looks pretty awful. But it says, find these words in the text below. Find class, teacher, and students. Okay, so take a look here. Here we go. There's 1. And here's students. And students again. And if we keep looking here, got it. So teacher, students, and class. Okay, all right, we got it, right? And you're supposed to, actually I underlined it, but you're supposed to circle it. Whoopsie. Okay, so we'll circle that there. Ta-da. Okay, now that's not the only step required here. The very, very, very end, it says here, how are the words the written in new script, but also how do they write ing, and what does this funny looking fish-like symbol mean? Now, it says the trainer is going to read this text to you. You should listen and try to figure out what these mean. So I need the text here, guys. 1 second. Now, I'm going to read this, but I'm going to be reading this in English. And while I'm reading it, you should try to follow along and figure out what these are. Okay, are you guys ready?